Today I'm going to show you how you can disassemble an engine. Now this is going to be on an EJ25, which is a Subaru single overhead cam boxer engine. Nonetheless, it should still help you become familiar with all the internals of an engine. Now this video was shot about 4 years ago in my old garage, and yes, that's how long ᴅᴏᴜ and Wrenches has been around. So if the surroundings and the editing is somewhat different, that's why. But enough of that, this is going to be a long video, so let's get to it. And I almost forgot, if you see any tools or products to use in this video that pique your interest, I'll put links to where you can buy them for cheap online down below in the description box, so don't be afraid to click on them and check them out. This engine had a rod knock, that's why I pulled it. What my plan for this is to basically disassemble it, take it apart, take the crank and the rods to the machine shop with the block, have them measure everything, probably machine the crankshaft and put new bearings in there and give it back to me. And I'm gonna put it back together, put it in the car, and hopefully that'll solve our knocking issue. There's a little tab at the back of this connector that if you press down, you can just slide this out like that, and then you just pull on these spark plug wires, just twist and pull. Grab it by the boot, not by the wires. Yeah. Okay, we're gonna do the same thing on this side. There's that. This side, the left side, also has a camshaft sensor connector, so we're gonna make sure we remove that. Then the spark plug wires. Okay, back to the front of the engine. We're gonna remove this crankshaft sensor connector. Next, this connector that's going to, I don't know, what it looks like, the oil pressure sending unit maybe. And what we're gonna have to do is, we're gonna disconnect this from the cylinder head. So I sprayed some PV blaster on this, so it's should come out without much problem. There we go. Alright, same thing for this one, and PV blaster on this, and twist, and it should come off. Okay, next we're gonna disconnect this connector for the knock sensor. Next, we need to disconnect this vacuum line that's going from the cylinder block to the top of the intake. And just twist and pull, and it should come out. Next, we're going to remove these two wiring harness connectors. There's tabs underneath them. Just press on them and pull. So yeah, next I'm just going to remove. There's four 12mm bolts on each side for the intake that attaches it to each cylinder head. So we're going to go ahead and remove those next, and then pull on the intake and see if it'll come off. Alright. That's it. We did alright. Here's how it looks like with the intake manifold removed. Next, I'm gonna remove this pipe, which is held in place by these four 10mm bolts. There we go. There are O-rings here. Make sure you replace these, and don't forget. Next, we're gonna remove all the timing belt. We're gonna take the timing belt out, the harmonic balancer, and all the timing belt components. So first step is gonna be removing this left side timing belt cover, and we're gonna align our the timing marks on our camshaft. There's our cover. Okay, so the marks we need to align are this notch that someone's got whiteout on. This needs to align up with this notch that's in the rear, the back timing belt cover. That looks good. Next, it's time to remove our harmonic balancer. Next, we should be able to wiggle this out. If you have a hard time wiggling this out, just you can hit it on the sides with a rubber mallet and keep wiggling it. Just resist the urge to stick anything underneath it and pry it open. Next, we need to remove all the 10mm bolts that are holding this I guess the right side timing belt cover in place. With the last, after we remove all the bolts, we just pull on this timing belt cover and it will come off. There's a rubber seal around this, so
Don't lose that.
Okay, so with that timing belt cover off, we have a closer look at all our timing components.
Okay, I got my nail ready. Just gonna put it through this hole and the hole in the piston. And once this goes up enough, that just pushes in and locks it in place. And you want to do this as slowly as possible. You know, there's not a whole lot you need to make up for. You know, you just need to turn this maybe up a few millimeters, but you want to do that as slowly as possible. You know, definitely don't crank on this hard at all. Okay, otherwise you risk damaging the hydraulic tension. This is all if you're gonna reuse this. See, I'm applying tension right now, but it's taking my time. There we go. It should be in place now. Just let go.
Alright, I don't know how well you guys are going to be able to see this, but there it is. This is how it should look. As you can see, this is already bending the nail a little bit, so just again, make sure you put something there that's strong. Next, I'm going to remove that bolt and remove the tensioner, then the timing bolt. But something I forgot to show you guys is all the timing marks on the other stuff. On the crank, there's the timing. There's a notch in the crank that needs to line up with this this notch on the block. And on the right side camshaft again, there's this notch that someone got white out on that needs to line up with that.
There we go.
Next, we remove our timing belt, but if you're like me and you're going to reuse the timing belt, just make sure you mark the direction which is rotating, which is clockwise. You put it on back the same way.
Next, we're going to remove our 3 rollers, which we got 2 that are smooth, and then we got 1 tooth one, and they all take a 14mm bolt. One. Third and last one. Next, it's time to slide off this crankshaft gear or pulley. There we go. Next, we're going to remove our water pump, which is held in place by these 6 bolts around the circumference. But before we do that, we need to disconnect this hose clamp off. There we go. Now onto the bolts. With all the bolts out, we just pull on this and there it comes.
Alright, next it's time to remove our, I'm going to remove the oil pump. Before we do that though, I'm going to drain the oil out of this and remove the oil filter. Get our catch pan here. There we go.
Okay, and here's the look at the oil I just got out of the engine. There's no metal shavings or anything for an engine that's got a rod knock, but they could have always replaced the oil after they got the knock. Next, they're going to remove the oil pump, which looks like it's held in place by 7 10mm bolts. So after I took the bolts out, you know, this was a little harder than the water pump to pull since it's got gasket making material all around it. So I just put my pry bar under it and just pulled on a little bit and popped out. This should come out now. There we go. Okay, next I'm going to remove this little plastic piece, which is held in place by these 2 10mm bolts. So next I'm just going to flip it to its side and start removing the lift side, the valve cover gasket, camshaft, and then the cylinder head. So first thing I'm going to remove is the valve cover. It's held in by place these 5 10mm bolts. So with all the little bolts removed, we got ready to remove our valve cover. Just make sure you don't lose these little grommets that are in here. It shouldn't take much force. There goes a grommet, by the way. And here's our valve cover gasket. You know, actually, removing this cylinder head is going to be a lot easier than I thought. I thought I had to remove the cam, but no, it's just going to be these 6 bolts that are holding it in, and just going to pop it off. Whenever you're removing a cylinder head, the removal of the bolts, the sequence is going to be the opposite of putting it back in. You know how you put it back in, you go from the center out. Well, when you're loosening the bolts, you're going to go from the outside in. So we're going to do this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. Oh, by the way, this requires a 14mm 12-point socket. So before I pull off the cylinder head, I think I need to remove this the oil dipstick tube which is connected to the cylinder head with that 10mm bolt. It's gonna slide out of the oil pan, and you just pull it out. Now we're ready to pull this off. And there we go. You might have to hit it with a rubber mallet. I didn't have to do that, but just took some wiggling, and it's just gonna come off. And here's a look at our pistons, which look in okay shape. Sometimes when you have a rod knock, you know, you can move the piston, but these look, I mean, they feel solid. So, and our gasket is the multi-layered. Is it multi-layered? No, it's a single-layered head gasket, which looks in pretty good shape. There's some carbon buildup on top of the pistons, but it's not excessive or anything. Basically the same thing for this side. First the valve cover. Now the bolts for this side. Okay, and here's a look at these pistons on this side. They look pretty much the same as the other one. Some carbon buildup on top of the pistons, but nothing out of the ordinary. No excessive play, nothing. So, you know, we're just probably gonna have to, well, I'm gonna have to take the engine apart anyway. But that's when we'll probably find out what the knock was from. Was it a main bearing or a rod bearing? Next, it's time to remove our motor mounts, the oil pan, and this little plate that's at the bottom of the engine. These two bolts, each motor mount is held in by 2 bolts, and these are 14mm. There's one. And here's the second one. There we go. Next, I'm just going to go around the circumference of the oil pan and remove all the 10mm bolts that are around it. I'm going to use a rag just to make things cause less stress. I can hear it. There we go. We get all this metal shavings here. Well, now we found evidence of a rod knock. Bad news is there's a lot of it. so yeah, hopefully we don't have a crank that we need to replace, and we can probably just get away with machining it. Next, we're going to remove the screen for the oil pickup tube. There we go. There we go. Okay, last thing I'm going to remove before I flip this engine over and start removing a couple of things that are left on top of the engine is this fitting for our oil filter. The engine flipped back to the right position. We're going to remove this water pipe. It's held in place by 2 10mm bolts here and here. There we go. Next, we're going to remove the knock sensor, which is held in place by a 12mm bolt. Next, we're going to remove this vacuum line. Just going to twist and pull on it. There we go. We got the engine down on the ground. Got it set up on a couple pieces of wood. And basically next what we're going to do is remove all those bolts that are holding that flex plate in. Then we're going to go around the circumference of the block. And like I said earlier, this engine splits in half, as in it splits in 2 from right here, but it's held in together obviously with a bunch of bolts. Some you can see from the top, some are going to be through the coolant jackets, and then maybe a couple on the side here and a couple on the back. So we're going to have to remove all that stuff, then try to split it apart. Well, we're going to remove this the wrist pins for the pistons, and then remove the connecting rods from the pistons first before we actually split it apart. But as far as what we're going to remove next is this gonna be this flex plate. Next we need to get the wrist pins out for the number 1 and number 2 cylinder. So we're gonna have to remove these little caps, which require a 14mm hex bit. It's got a washer on it, so don't lose it. Okay, next it's time to remove the separator plate and this little plate here. You're gonna need
to use an impact screwdriver for this. There we go. There's that. Okay, it looks like we got another cap that is going to require 12-point hex bit that we need to remove. Next step is going to be removing these C-clips that hold in the wrist pins that connect the pistons to your connecting rods. We're going to do this for the both front cylinders, which are number 1 and number 2. Here's one, and here's number 2. Now it's time to remove the wrist pins from the number 1 and number 2 cylinders. The way we're going to do this, you're going to have to use a long, thin screwdriver. You're going to go in the back of the block. And then you're gonna have to fit this around the rod for the this what is that number 4 cylinder, and rest it against the back of the wrist pin for the number 2 cylinder, which is in the front of this cylinder. And then we're gonna hit this with a hammer, and our wrist pin is gonna come out from the front. Barely long enough, but there it is. There's a wrist pin for our number 2 cylinder. Now cylinder number 1. Now the same thing for the number 3 and 4 cylinder. First the little C-clips. Here's number 4. Okay, next is time to remove the pistons. The way we go about doing this is we get them to top dead center. Once they're top dead center, we actually keep going. Once the other one gets close there, that means the rod has gone back inside the block, and then we just kind of push and twist on these, which is easier said than done. The same thing on this side. The one on this side it just pops out, and we can remove our piston. This is the number 1 piston. There we go. There we go. There's piston number 2. Now time to remove the other 2 pistons. Basically the same thing. Also, it's a good idea to wrap these your connecting rods in some rags so that they don't scratch the cylinder surface. Now we just twist and push these, and the same thing for the other side. And there's number 3. And here's the last one. Oh, and I think I found out where a rod knock is coming from. Cylinder number 1. None of the other ones sound anything, well, they don't even move, they're firm. This is the only one that's loose and it's knocking right now. Next it's time to start removing the bolts that go around the circumference of the block. You can see those 5 on top. There's going to be a bunch inside the water jackets on this side, and on the other side, and again on the oil pump side, and some on the back. These are all 12 millimeters, by the way. Next we flip the cylinder head on its side, where it's facing the number 2 and 4 cylinders upwards, and we're gonna remove 2 bolts that are inside the coolant jackets, and which are 12 millimeter, which require a 12 millimeter 12-point socket. Okay, I'm gonna do this side with the engine resting on the cardboard. On this side, there's 2 on the top, 2, and then 2 bolts on the bottom. Okay, next we're going to remove this little 10 millimeter bolt that's at the bottom of the engine. There's two more bolts here that I almost missed. They're right behind the number 3 cylinder. This guy and this guy. Just going to remove those next. This is also a 12 millimeter bolt. Here's the last 3 bolts that are holding this block together.
Okay, so after removing this last bolt, we flip our engine to the side where number 3 and number 1 cylinders are facing up. Then it's time to try and separate our block. And reading on some forums, the most common way of separating these two is to stick a car jack here, and then against the bell housing on the bottom side. Then you put the top side, you rest it against here, and then you just crank the car jack, and then that pushes them apart. But I also saw somewhere that someone mentioned that you can also use the crankshaft and the connecting rod to separate them. By the way I'm doing it now. Yeah, you just stick screwdrivers through here, through the access point for the wrist pins. They go through the connecting rods like this, and then you brace them against the other side of the cylinder. Make sure it doesn't touch the other connecting rod. The same thing for the bottom, and then we're going to use the crankshaft to crank it, and then the connecting rods and the crankshaft, their force is going to help separate this the rear of the block. And then if you have to, we'll do the same thing for the front cylinders, and then after that we should be able to lift the top part off the bottom part and have access to our crankshaft and our connecting rods. Filtered, there we go. See, it's separating from this side. Alright guys, this corner is just not cooperating. All the other corners have separated, but this side is stuck on pretty good. So what I'm gonna try is, actually, since this side is coming loose nicely, I stuck back one of these bolts down here. It's on there pretty loose, and what I'm gonna do is, what happens is when you're turning the crankshaft to loosen these, to separate these, this side lifts up a lot sooner, so I guess it kind of pushes that side down even further. So with this bolt here, I'm gonna hope this is gonna hold it in place a little bit for that side to start separating. Okay, so that's what I'm gonna try next. Yeah, that worked. Can't believe it. That worked. Too easy. Okay, now I think we should be able to wiggle this off. There we go. We are able to wiggle it off. There it is, finally. And here's our suspect connecting rod. Should be number 3, which feels pretty good. All the main seals look pretty good. Pop off our rear main seal. Get our crankshaft out of here. And we lost one of the main bearings, I guess. It's time to remove this connecting rod, and this is held in by just these two 12mm nuts. Here's our bearings, and this is all chewed up badly. This is not dirt. I don't know how well you're gonna be able to see, but this bearing is all chewed up really bad. But good news is our crankshaft feels really smooth. Oh yeah, look how loosely, well, it doesn't even fit this bearing. It's, all the other ones, if you take them out, they're gonna get stuck on there. It's actually gonna be kind of hard to press them in, but this one is either too thin. Well, it's probably too thin, and it's also has probably worn out this side pretty badly on the connecting rod. So yeah, I don't know if I have to get a new connecting rod or they're gonna be able to do something with this, but again, this is all going to the machine shop now.
And that's all there is to disassembling a Subaru EJ25 engine. Now, if you're interested in the reassembly of the engine and how it turns out once it's put back in the car, I'll put a video for that in probably about a week. And when it's ready, I'll put a link to it on this side of the screen that you can click on. There's also a separate video on how you can remove this same engine from a Subaru. And for that, I'll put a link right on the lower side of the screen for you as well. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.